Hi there! Today we will be comparing Indigenous and Western worldviews. How do Indigenous and Western worldviews differ? Indigenous and Western worldviews differ in many ways, which include their views on nature, land use, spirituality, health, use of stories, and community. What are Indigenous worldviews based on? Spirituality. Multiple truths from individual experiences. Relatedness, all things are connected. Land is sacred and given by Creator. Time is cyclical and nonlinear. Comfort is measured by quality of relationships. Humans are not the most important in comparison to nature. Wealth is for the good of community. On the other hand, what are Western worldviews based on? They are based on scientific proof and skepticism, based on one truth from science or law. Compartmentalized society, the individual. Land is resource to be used, developed to benefit humans, nature is conquered. Time is structured, linear, and future-oriented. Comfort comes from how successful an individual is. Humans are the most important. Western wealth is for personal gain. Examples of how these worldviews manifest in our society. Let's start from the beginning, stemming all the way back from the creation story. There are a number of elements in the Judeo-Christian story that are recognizable as contributing factors moral failures within their worldview. Perhaps the most damaging is the hierarchy of man. This is the designation of man as the top of the pyramid in regards to earthly creatures. Because of this positioning, it is easy for one raised in this tradition to understand themselves as above the natural world or to view the natural world as theirs to exploit as opposed to a system that they must find balance with and their place in. The negative feeling towards the natural world is further exacerbated with the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Eve is not even made in God's image, but from Adam's rib as a companion for him. Beyond that, her main role in the story is to betray God by taking the apple and curse mankind. This was a very patriarchal viewpoint of Eve and opposite of the matriarchal values of Indigenous worldviews. Moreover, the portrayal of animals in the Western creation story is also opposite of how animals are portrayed in the Indigenous creation story. In Western creation story, exposure to the natural world is treated as a grave punishment and animals are portrayed as the villainous through the devil taking guise as a snake. On the other hand, in Indigenous worldview, in the creation story of Turtle Island, Sky Woman is a kind figure who does nothing but act in the best interest of her family. Even though at the beginning of the story, she falls through a hole in the sky, she is never defined by her mistake. In fact, she is hardly blamed and her role as a mother is celebrated. She exists before the world, a natural and primordial force. She is heralded as mother of life. This is a great example of a positive matriarchal portrayal which is embedded in Indigenous worldview. The celebration of matriarchal values is highly prevalent in Indigenous culture wherein women's familial, ritualistic, and leadership roles are all highly valued. The story of Turtle Island has an opposite emphasis in comparison to the Western creation story. The animals existed before Sky Woman reached the continent, and it was through their hard work and benevolence that humanity had an opportunity to set roots in this world. Animals were not created for humans to subsist on, but their generosity allowed humans to survive. This aligns with Indigenous traditions that honor the subject of a hunt and is consistent with the importance placed upon only taking what you need from nature, a tenet of how Indigenous traditions interact with the natural world. Now, let's talk about colonialism and the creation of residential schools and how are these informed by Western worldviews. The colonization of Turtle Island was driven by Western worldviews, which include man is at the top of the hierarchy. Land is to be conquered. The importance of individual success rather than communal success. Wealth is for personal gain rather than shared. Disregard for other human life and animals. Compartmentalized society. The Western worldviews greatly contradict Indigenous values that are founded on importance of land, spirituality, living as a community. Europeans use their Western worldviews to justify the atrocities they have done to Indigenous peoples. By enacting on their Western worldviews, Europeans have caused detrimental effects on Indigenous peoples and on their land. Some of the effects of this include the killings of millions of Indigenous people across Turtle Island, destruction and overharvesting of resources. Killings of animals, for example, the buffalo slaughter. Occupation of stolen indigenous lands. The effects of colonization are still very much present to this day. Our current societal and political structures are still founded on these colonial roots. The creation of residential schools was driven by Western worldviews, which include disregard for other human life, superiority of certain race, compartmentalized society, emphasis on individualism rather than community, homogeny, assimilation rather than the existence of multiple truths and identities. The Western worldviews greatly contradict Indigenous values that are founded on the importance of connectedness to community, family, preserving culture, language, and connection to land. Europeans use their Western worldviews to justify the atrocities they have done to Indigenous children and their families. The creation of residential schools, which are shaped by Western worldviews, have left devastating effects which include abuse and killings of Indigenous children, loss of connection to family, loss of connection to land, culture, and language, intergenerational trauma. The last residential school in Canada closed in the year 1996. Thousands of unmarked graves were found in various residential schools across Canada. The trauma that children and families have gone through because of these residential schools can still be felt by many to this day. There are many contrasting views between Indigenous and Western worldviews. Having said that, using a Western worldview orientation to evaluate non-Western ways of knowing and being in the world is not a tenable method. It denies the realities and experiences of Indigenous people. Recognizing the validity of Indigenous worldviews, overcoming Western bias, and dismantling the hierarchy between written knowledge and oral tradition are some of the ways of bridging the gap between Indigenous and Western worldviews. People should work towards incorporating both these worldviews and allowing them to complement and strengthen one another.